Good afternoon, fellows, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to welcome you back to this afternoon session. I'm the moderator of this session. My name is Kenny Tonga from Zambia. Basically, our topic for this afternoon is innovative approaches to the Sustainable Development Goals. I'd like to introduce our panelists this afternoon. I'd like to introduce, sitting right next to me, Dr. Mabuba Diane, Group Head, Corporate Investment Banking, as Bank ABC. Welcome. Also, I'd like to introduce Mr. Alonzo Wind, Deputy Mission Director, USAID, Southern Africa. Welcome.
Thank you.
And lastly, but certainly not the least, Mr. Simon Carpenter. He is the Chief Technology Advisor, SAP Africa.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
I'd like to let you know that we were supposed to have Mr. Agon Ntwaye from the Innovation Hub, but unfortunately, he's not feeling too well today, so we'll go with the three panelists. I'm sure we'll have a very fantastic afternoon. The Brundtland Commission's 1987 report defined sustainable development as I quote, development which meets the needs of the current generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Since then, sustainable development has become the cornerstone of the work of global institutions, including the United Nations, private sector, and civil society. The Sustainable Development Agenda adopted by the UN in 2015 has a formidable task of realizing 17 goals with 169 targets. Now, these targets are integrated and indivisible and balance the three dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. So it's innovation through low-cost technologies, processes, as well as services, which is a concrete way. Okay. Individuals in this case, the fellows that are here today, can contribute to their countries by meeting the sustainable development targets. Now, during this 90-minute session, the panelists will basically discuss the Sustainable Development Agenda and how we can contribute to its success using innovative technology, processes, and indeed services. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we are getting started. But before I get to my first question, I think our panelists deserve a round of applause from everybody else. Just one final round of applause. All right, so the panelists, I've introduced them in a very, very, very brief manner. I'll kindly request the panelists to introduce themselves in detail. And in introducing yourselves, I would like you to answer this question to do with how research and innovation can support sustainable development and, of course, its agenda. Maybe we'll start with you, Doc.
My name is Mabuba. I originally come from Senegal, West Africa, where I did my first master's degree in computer science and in mathematics. And after my second master's degree, I was fortunate enough to go to Italy at the International Center of Theoretical Physics to do a third master in a postgraduate in applied mathematics. And I was lucky to get a scholarship again from the European Union to go to Germany to do a master in financial risk management and a PhD in financial risk management. And I worked 6 years in Germany for Dresdner Bank and moved to London with Credit Suisse, 7 years. And I decided to come Africa because I strongly do believe that this continent has to be built by young African people and do it in a most sustainable manner. And this is why I joined Barclays Bank, where I was the regional managing director for corporate investment banking for Barclays. And out of the 12 countries of Barclays, I was a regional MD running 6. And recently, I joined a fellow American guy called Bob Diamond. And the reason why I joined Bank ABC under Atlas Mara, because Bob was very determined of providing financial services, not the ways usual big global banks do it. We want it to be relevant in Africa. And when you say you want to be relevant in Africa, each of those, let's say, of those industry sectors that drive the GDP of the country, we want to be relevant in it. And we want to do it in the most sustainable manner. And I will disclose later how we would like to do it and the way we would like to do it. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mabu.
So, firstly, it's great to be here today, and it's wonderful to see so many of you future leaders of Africa and existing leaders of Africa gathered in one place. It's really great. As you've heard, my name's Simon Carpenter. I'm the Chief Technology Advisor for SAP in Africa. I've been with the SAP company for 22 years, and I believe we've made a significant difference across the continent, and we'll touch on some of those things. But the way I like to think about it is this, and I'd ask all of you to just kind of picture the little planet that we're on, hurtling through space, like a minibus taxi or a matatu or a moleway or whatever you want to call it for wherever you come from. And think about what happens when you overload a vehicle. Okay, firstly, it gets pretty uncomfortable inside. It also gets unsafe because it's now not so easy to stop. And the vehicle itself suffers from accelerated wear and tear. And there's a strong chance you won't get to your destination, wherever that might be. So I think that's a really good analogy for the planet we all inhabit. If you look at our planet today, we're 7.4 billion people. We are, depending on who you talk to, we're sort of already exceeding the Earth's natural carrying capacity by about 1.5 times. By 2050, we're going to be around about 9.2 billion people on this planet. And the vast majority of that is going to be happening on our continent. Today, we are 1.1 billion people here. We account for about 15% of global population. By 2050, we will be, by all estimates, somewhere around 2.5 billion people. So we're going to more than double the inhabitants of Africa in a continent that's already quite stressed when it comes to things like water and amenities and infrastructure. So as leaders, what we all have to think about is, what do those numbers mean? What do they mean when it comes to food security, water, fresh air, housing, schooling, inhabitation, infrastructure? It's a big, big challenge. And I think for me and for our company, we kind of recognize that there is no way we will meet the Sustainable Development Goals if we continue to behave, think, and act in the same way that we created these challenges in the first place. So it's exciting to be here to talk about innovation, because we have to innovate everything. We have to innovate how we think. We have to innovate how we behave. And for me, and again for our company, there are only 2 infinite resources on this planet. Everything else is finite. Air, water, oil, gas, it's all finite. What's infinite is information and human ingenuity. And what we're trying to get done is to bring human ingenuity and information technologies together in new ways, so that, to the point Abube made, we can dial this planet in, dial our society in a way that really allows us to get things done without creating further stresses on the environment. So whether that be using information to drive better procurement in the public sector and stamp out corruption, whether that be using the Internet of Things to manage water resources better or farm more precisely, it all kind of starts to come together in a way that will help us meet those goals. So, what we've got to do is think systemically, we've got to think digitally, we've got to think about how technology can help us. And just a little thing like putting something on a digital platform like this means I no longer have to grow and process a tree to put it on a piece of paper like this. It also means that I can go and interact with my bank or with my government agency without having to travel somewhere and do it face to face. That frees up resources. If I don't plant a tree, I can plant a crop. And if I use information to plant that crop and manage it very precisely, I use less water, less fertilizer, less energy, and I can have a greater yield. So for me, these things are all very inextricable, and I hope we're going to cover that this evening.
Absolutely. And then I think at a later stage, I'd like to get more detail on the app that you showed me on your iPad. It's very interesting. But maybe at this point, we hear from Alonso.
Well, I'm the Deputy Mission Director for USAID Southern Africa, and I'm enormously pleased to be able to be here today. This is the second time around I've been able to join the Southern Africa Regional Conference. I've been here in South Africa for a little over a year and a half, resident in Pretoria. I've had the opportunity to come to South Africa a number of times in past decades. I've spent about 17 years working within USAID, the Agency for International Development, which is the premier U.S. government development agency around the world, usually attached or co-located within U.S. embassies in different countries. Prior to that, I spent about 17 years working in different civil society organizations and private development groups, and prior to that, I started out in what I joke with friends, this life of crime, as a rural Peace Corps a rural public health Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador. Before that, I was an aspiring science fiction writer. And I think being a science fiction writer and editor is good preparation for government work. So perhaps that gives me a little bit of an appreciation for a futurist approach in terms of considering innovation. Science, technology, and innovation are obviously increasingly engines of growth in the kind of society that we live in. We live in a world, as Simon has talked about, of increasingly interconnectedness and shared global challenges of economic development and growth, of providing youth with a promising future, improving health care for all of our citizens, sustainably increasing agricultural yields, ensuring energy security, providing clean, accessible water, conserving our environment, and addressing the effects of climate change, all of which are very much a part of the Sustainable Development Goals. Let me stop there and we'll find an opportunity to talk more about
we'll pick it up.
Questions.
Yeah, since we're talking about innovation as a driver of sustainable development, I'm thinking of the people in the rural areas. How exactly do we do this, putting into consideration the fact that maybe they might be technologically disadvantaged, so to speak? I don't know who can pick that one up.
Look, I think that what is happening today in East Africa, especially in the agency banking world, is a very illustrative example that you don't need to do things 10, 15 years ago to achieve the same thing. Today, you can go 600 kilometers to Dar es Salaam and almost receive the same banking services that you are in Dar es Salaam. And what, for example, the telecom companies have done today, regardless of where you are in the country, you can buy airtime. Regardless of you are in the country, you should be receiving the same services. I recently came from Israel, where I have seen them implementing two things, very technology-driven, that assist, let's say, what I will call the small-scale farmers. They have created the concept of what they call community greenhouses, where basically instead of somebody owning only a parcel of the greenhouse, they make a cooperative and a group of individuals to whom the greenhouse is. They did not stop there. They also created something that they call agri-services technical centers. Because today, the reason why, let's say, small farmers in Africa, let's say, are struggling, because they don't have, let's say, the mean and the power, let's say, to go and buy a tractor. They don't have the mean and the power, let's say, to have those used machinery from John Deere to do the harvesting. But if we just create a platform where they co-own it, and in Israel, they have designed it such that one single agri-services technical center could service 5,000 small farmers. Can you imagine now buying 2 or 3 tractors serving 5,000 farmers? Those are very simple, innovative ways of looking at things that could change dramatically the way, let's say, the humanity is basically serviced. I think that our colleague from SAP mentioned something very, very important about what this small device could do. It's not only replacing maybe let's say, the piece of paper. Today, 90% of, let's say, the farmers in Africa, 90% of the African citizens today, they almost own a mobile phone. You go to Germany, there is a bank called Number One. They don't have a branch. They interact with their customer on a mobile phone, which means that today we can almost extend banking services to almost everybody who get a mobile phone. What Uber has done has almost reduced by almost 25, 30% the cost of transport in certain, let's say, urban areas. That is another evidence, another example how quickly innovation could cheapen things, could get access to, could allow people to get access to certain things that they do not used to get access to. And I strongly do believe that today, technology, digital, could transform our way of doing in a spectacular manner. I don't know who among you, among you here has children. I have a daughter who is 3 years old. When she wake up in the morning, the first thing that he asks, Daddy, can I borrow your iPad? If I see the type of things, even the way she's using her hand with the iPad is showing us that this is where the world is going. And I strongly do believe that Africa is today well positioned to compete with the global, with the Western world, because we can catch up and even exceed where the Western world is going. And a typical example is mobile money. I can tell you that the Western world may challenge the assumption, but mobile money has been created from Africa. Today, I have seen Société Générale from Paris, from France, trying almost to get back mobile money back to Europe, right? You go to East Africa, you can go in a nightclub and buy a beer from your M-Pesa. And all those things are really giving me the confidence that Africa is in the right path. And we young African leaders now have to take that destiny in our hand, leverage technology, and build a sustainable development.
I don't disagree with Mabuba, but I think that there is a reality of a digital divide in the world today, and it does come down to the enabling environment and government policies
Absolutely.
that may promote the kind of vision that you're describing. And certainly there are a number of enlightened governments that have been doing so. And yet there are also government policies that have been holding things back. And so there is very much that potential for Africa. But just as Brazil used to be sometimes described as a country that was always with the potential of being able to move forward, but never quite making it, I think it's essential for African leaders to overcome the resistance and conservatism that does exist in many countries and that is holding back that innovation and entrepreneurial spirit that exists in much of Africa.
Simon?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because we encounter that kind of impediment quite often when we work in Africa. But there's another interesting kind of movement that's happening out there, and that is at the consumer end and the citizen end of the market. People are finding ways to circumvent
Correct.
rules and regulations.
Correct.
And if you look at the taxi industry, and to a certain extent if you look at the banking industry being attacked by fintech companies
Yes.
on every front, the first reaction of the incumbent is to run to the regulator, whoever that regulator may be, and try and stop this new movement, whether it's something like Uber or a fintech or whatever. But the problem is, we love it.
Correct.
I'm sure many of you use Uber. I will never go back to using a taxi
Yes.
because I know exactly what's happening in my life when I see that Uber vehicle arriving. So these technologies are changing behaviors. It's like we've opened the bottle, we've let the genie out, and it's not going back in. That's the one point. The other point, picking up on some of the things you've said, is that it's interesting to think. If you think about M-Pesa was driven by constraint.
Correct.
People wanted to be able to move money, but there's no branch banking network in that environment. So we found a way to use technology to deliver. And more you're seeing that in Africa. There's an organization up, to pick up on your farming story, there's an organization up in West Africa called Hello Tractor. It's an Uber for small farming implements that a small-scale farmer can summon with their phone and come and plow the field or harrow or do whatever it is they need to do. And we've seen this again. There's this, you're quite right, mobile technology is pervasive in across Africa. Not everybody has a smartphone, but you can do an amazing amount with a feature phone.
Yes.
So we've done projects with small-scale farmers in Africa where simply using a feature phone, we're able to give them a view into the commodity price. We're able to help them understand what they should be asking for that cash crop they're growing so that they don't lose out and someone else takes that value at their expense.
Look.
And the impact that can have on a woman who's running a small-scale farm in her ability to feed and clothe and educate her family is phenomenal.
Yes.
Very heartening.
Just to echo what Simon is saying, our bank has implemented a system called e-Vulture in Zambia. The government wanted to reach in one go 250,000 farmers, where they distribute them seed and fertilizer. We have created a card which serves for two purposes. We could send money to that card, and we could block the money such that the card can only be used to buy seed and fertilizer in designated points. But the same card also could be used for the farmer to sell his crop back to the Food Reserve Agency or to a set of, let's say, approved, let's say, traders. Can you imagine now the set of all farmers getting together and do the way the US does it, set themselves into cooperative, and ask all the buyers, come please, we're going to organize an open tender system where we have aggregated on our digital platform all our harvest. Whoever bids the best gets a lot. Can you just imagine what, by leveraging digital technology, how the purchase, how the bargaining power of the farmers has increased significantly. And I was in Lusaka last week, where I was even telling the farmer, by the way, do you know that by getting all of you onto this digital platform, you can even negotiate now buying your seed on your fertilizer with global international suppliers sitting here. Because if you put, let's say, 500,000, let's say, small farmers, and everybody is using, let's say, 100 kilograms of fertilizer and seed, if when you aggregate that order and you call Yara from Norway or you call ICT from Israel, they will bid.
Yep.
Because the order is exceeding at least $10–15 million that's almost half of a cargo of a fertilizer. That's why I strongly do believe today the digital technology and innovation could basically help us to transform things overnight.
Not to be a contrarian, excuse me for interrupting,
Sure.
Kenny, but I can't resist jumping in on the earlier example about Uber. I also love Uber. My daughter was an apostle teasing me for a long time about not using it, and so finally she insisted on putting the app on my phone, and I went along with it. But what do you think about the implications from a social justice point of view? Because I know one of the concerns that many of us have had has been the reality that many Uber drivers that are linked into the system are often receiving a pittance in terms of the amount of money that they're doing in terms of transactions compared to your traditional taxi models. Now, I recall seeing announcements on social media in the last week that Uber South Africa was lifting the 20% reduction in fares that they had, which they didn't say had really fallen unfairly on the drivers. And so now they've restored the fares somewhat. Presumably that means the drivers will get a little bit more money. But I think we also have to be mindful in terms of when we're using these sorts of technologies, how to ensure that they don't remain in the hand of monopolists or processes that end up robbing essentially the gains from those that are at the lowest end of the socioeconomic ladder.
I think that's a really good point that you make there. But even there, what you're starting to see is that the very social net or the very internet fabric that we plug into to make something like Uber happen can also be used to kind of regulate that environment, because there's been a lot of activity on the various social networks about exactly that issue, and it's forced the hand of Uber. It's kind of getting them to behave and not be an abusive monopolist.
Mm-hmm.
So
Look,
it's not perfect, but
sorry, I'm going to have to just take the conversation forward, if you don't mind, with all due respect. As we speak about innovation, are we restricting ourselves to ICTs only, or are there other methods? I think I'd like to get a response from just one panelist before I move on to the fellows to pick up on their questions.
Let me offer some examples from the USAID experience that aren't strictly ICT issues. One of the approaches that USAID has adopted, and it's been fueled a lot by our Global Development Lab, which has been something of a spin-off of a Google approach to development, and has made for a very interesting grafting in terms of a donor agency model. And it's put forward new approaches in development solutions. Rather than putting out contracts and grants, we've now been conducting grand challenges and competitions with awards based on the best solution to a particular problem. And in this case, one problem was the issue of Ebola, how to be able to provide for better protective gear for health workers that were addressing the Ebola crisis in West Africa. Ultimately, as a result of the competition, some very innovative young people came up with a scheme for much better protective gear that enabled health workers to work for longer periods of time without having to remove all of the gear and deal with the lack of air conditioning in there. So that medical protective gear has been a great way in terms of being able to introduce a relatively simple innovation in terms of ventilation, and has enabled a ramping up of care. Another thing that we've been able to do here in South Africa has been a partnership between USAID and the Department of Science and Technology and the Department of Water Resources, where we're working with helicopter-mounted magnetic resonance sensors to enable the management by the government of South Africa and the government of Botswana of the Ramotswa aquifer, using helicopter magnetic sensors in terms of being able to track groundwater, the position of aquifers, and get that data into thus other managers' hands to be able to know how to better address the water resources.
Great. At this point, we should move to the questions. I hope the microphones are already in place. Just to recap, our guests this afternoon, we have Mr. Simon Carpenter, Chief Technology Advisor, SAP Africa, Dr. Mabuba Diane, Group Head of Corporate Investment Banking, that's Bank ABC, also as well as Mr. Alonzo Wind, Deputy Mission Director, USAID, Southern Africa. We are ready to take questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Elma Siamuzo from Zambia. Mine is an observation that I made was doing a practicum with the US Africa Development Foundation. You notice that a number of fellows, earlier on today when we were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, a key thing came up was that of collaboration, and how that through the collaboration amongst the fellows, regional collaboration, we can actually drive sustainable development to a reality. But what I see as a gap is that where there are homegrown solutions to attaining these sustainable development goals, these solutions are not given the frontage, the platform for other people to tap into those innovations and replicate them in other countries. I'll give an example of one project that I read through, because I was doing the briefings for Parliament, is these solar-powered computers that are being used in remote parts of the country, designed by one of the fellows in the 2015 cohort, to actually, no, 2014 cohort, and they're being used in remote parts of the country. But I don't see any other country, at least I haven't heard any other country, taking that initiative and adopting it in their country. So I'm looking at this platform that we have. It's a beautiful platform. We have the fellows and all that. But where are the drivers, the people that have the political will to have these initiatives grown or adopted in the countries and replicated, so that we have solutions that are sustainable, that we can actually finance as countries? The government representatives are not here. The banks are not here who can finance such initiatives.
Yeah.
At least you're here. I'm glad that you're finally here.
Bank ABC
But
is represented.
basically, I'd want to see more of that. Homegrown ideas given that platform and given the support that they deserve. You know, we have Muhammad here. I think he's piloting something very brilliant. I had an opportunity basically to read a lot of brilliant projects that I think are not being given that platform that can help other countries replicate it and make solutions to the challenges that we continue to face day in and day out. For me, that is the challenge that I present to this House. How can we help these brilliant young men and women get the ideas to be replicated in the region for the sustainable development of Africa? Thank you.
Thank you, Alma.
Look, that's a very, very, very good question. And I think that, again, I'm not here to do an open publicity of the Mandela Washington Fellowship program, But this platform is exactly what you are asking for. And believe me, this foundation, this platform, the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, is basically putting young Africans together with the objective to spread the drive across Africa. And again, sorry me to do a little bit of marketing of Apple here. The life of Steve Jobs, the story of Steve Jobs, the dedication of Steve Jobs, the commitment of Steve Jobs, the perseverance of Steve Jobs has shown that nothing, absolutely nothing in life will be achieved for free. He built a multi-billion-dollar company by dedicating his entire life. If we young African people, if you, the young African leaders that has been very fortunate to go through the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, it's now your responsibility to spread the news. It's your responsibility to get whatever innovation platform is happening in one country, bring it in another country. And believe me, those days where big global banks are coming to Africa and dictate, those days are gone. Today you have young, black, local African people, educated abroad, coming back home, and we want to do it together. But you need to convince us that you know what you're talking about. You need to convince us that you have done your business case, and the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program is providing you that platform. Don't think country, think Africa. Don't think country, think region. To tell you that today, a bank like Afri-Exim Bank has more than $750 million to promote intra-Africa trade. Buy maize from Zambia, go and sell it in Zimbabwe. Buy maize from Zambia, go and sell it in Mozambique. Those trade corridors are there. Leverage technology to know where it is supply, where it is demand. And I strongly do believe today, funding is not an issue. What is an issue today? And sorry to say too openly, young people sometimes want to get rich very quickly. And there is nothing like shortcut in life. And I like the point that you made that you copy past. It's also part of innovation. You go to Zambia, you see something that works. You go to Ghana, it doesn't happen, run. There is an opportunity. If you wait 2 more days, the opportunity is gone. And the bankers, believe me, smart bankers are there to support you, to help you to monetize the opportunity. Thank you.
Simon, did you want to make a contribution?
No, I
very
think
quickly?
you're absolutely correct. The additional point I would like to make is that sometimes I think we don't hold our politicians accountable. And it needs to go beyond trying to convince people like you that we have a good idea. This cohort needs to challenge people like you
Correct.
and me and say, we've got a better idea. And maybe it's time for you to move out the way because you're holding on to the past.
Correct.
Can I just add a little something to
Sure.
that? I don't know the particulars of the solar-powered computer that you mentioned, but I do think that the impatience of youth is a positive force, a driver in terms of what we're talking about, but it's often a bit of hard work and grit. What was it, Thomas Alva Edison, who said, in terms of his creativity, 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. I mean, you've got to be able to do the hard work to take a proof of concept to a certain level where it actually is potentially scalable.
Correct.
And that's not an easy task. And you also have to use data. You have to be able to demonstrate evidence-based that a particular idea, a particular concept really does work, and then look to use different tools, videos, social media, other approaches. I wouldn't necessarily turn to government or the big banks either in terms of being able to get the word out to the point in which you can actually get some better dissemination of a good idea.
Someone actually once said to me that, as young people, we need to change our attitude towards especially governments. Instead of us asking the question, what should the government do for me? It's better you say, what can I do for the government and stuff like that. So we can move on. We can pick up a question at the end there. It's Aaron.
Being a Pan-Africanist, I'll sway more towards the social side. When you look at Uber and its introduction in certain communities, some people have protested because it has offered cheaper transportation services, and this has put out of business those cab drivers who do not join the network, those who probably depend on that one taxi to feed 7, 8 people, because it's cheaper than what prices they are offering. So as we look at the need to innovate, how do we balance that with us also needing to have a heart for our poorest of the poor in our communities? Then quickly, let me also get to the e-voucher system, which you talked about, which is taking place in my country. One thing I've noticed is that because there is the private sector which has been brought on board in the implementation of the system, what they do is, because they notice that these farmers are given these cards and they can go and swipe in their stores to get their inputs, these cartels inflate the prices of these fertilizers and seeds. And because they know that the farmer has nowhere else to go, they only are supposed to go to these approved stores. Sometimes they even sell fertilizer even twice the amount, which most farmers have objected to. They prefer the sort of support government used to give them, of them going with their own money and having the bargaining power to negotiate the price of that fertilizer. How do we look at those very critical issues?
Look, I think that in any system, there are people who abuse the system. But if you remember also what I said to you about the e-voucher, by the only single fact that they are on a single digital platform, you could aggregate the order in 30 seconds. Because if I have 200, 500,000 farmers, and I take all the aggregate orders, and I say I have, let's say, 500,000, let's say 500 tons in a 1 million ton. Those same farmers, through their association, could also ask people to bid. In any single market, in any market, right, there is what I will call price discovery. If there is not if there is no price transparency, people tend to arbitrage. And believe me, it will come very, very, very soon where even the farmers no longer need those wholesalers of fertilizer to buy fertilizer, because they can float the tender even in the regional international market. Number one. The first point that you mentioned about also the guy who is driving a taxi who's no longer able to feed his family because Uber are scam. I will flip the question also in the reverse gear, because today, right, is it not just also a way of forcing that guy to think differently of providing his services? You cannot be selling me the same services 20 years ago, and you're expecting to sell me the same services today with an inflated price. And this is now why I believe, and I strongly believe, that in the day-to-day we do our things, even the way we clean our product, the way we hire our house girls, is changing, like it or not. I remember when I was in London, I wanted to hire somebody to work for me. He said, no, I cannot afford to work full-time for you. Pay me 3 hours, I come and do the job for 3 hours, because I have 10 more people that I'm servicing in a day. It's a completely different way of being a housewife. It's an innovative way. Instead of working for one person, you work for 10 different persons. If every single person pay you, let's say, 2,000 rand, it's 20,000 rand, instead of working for somebody and getting 6,000 rand. For me, things have changed. If you ask Kodak 20 years ago, everybody would think that we'll be going in a studio and do the picture. Today, nobody needs to go there. And it's because things have changed. And I strongly believe that those farmers that you mentioned, it will come to a point where all those orders will be aggregated, and they will call those suppliers and tell them, guys, please bid.
Alonso, did you want to make a contribution?
No, I think Abuba covered.
All right, great. We'll move on with the questions. I'll get a question from the lady here, then move to the gentleman there.
Hello, I'm Victorine Sarr from Senegal. I'm a beauty entrepreneur. So I started my company with what we call today Love Money. So my friends and family helped me started my company. So working for a bank, I'm asking what are the innovative ways that banks are using to help SMEs. Today we know that I think the right number is 90% of the companies in Africa are SMEs. Banks don't support SMEs. Let's say it. So what do you do exactly? What are the innovative ways that the banking industry is doing to support SMEs? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I hope that I get that one, yeah? Look, that's a very good question. And to tell you how challenging could be financing SME in Africa. After 20 odd years in banking, I went back to my home country, our home country, Senegal, and I wanted to set a cooking oil factory. I did a business plan, did everything, put my suit and said, okay, let me go and see the bank. I put 3 plots of land that I have in the most expensive street in my country, you know, Almadi. I buy the machinery from India. I put all the capex. And I went to the bank and I said, I need working capital. They was almost asking me the birth certificate of my grandmother. Okay? And I said to myself, should I give up or should I not give up? And this is now what our colleague was saying was very important, is being perseverant. And I ask myself, I see many women every morning, they sell cooking oil, but the ones that are not refined is crude. They have their little machinery in the back of their houses, they do the thing, and in the morning they say it. And I say, okay, by the way, if I go and talk with this woman, I have a capacity that crash 10 ton a day. They crash 100 kilogram, 150 kilogram a day. I tell them, bring me your peanut, I crash it, the next day you get something clean, you get something in a sachet, and I give it back to you. Am I not replacing the bank with the woman? Today, we're doing 20,000, we're doing 20 tons a day. Wow. And I don't need a bank. It's only after I have convinced and proven that my story is right that the banks start knocking to your door.
And then you don't need them.
And I don't need them. What I'm trying to tell you, where you are an entrepreneur, don't take no for an answer. And when you are an entrepreneur, there is, Bob Marley said, when one door is closed, another is open. Banks are not only the only financing mechanism. Today, you do beauty. You can go and see your potential end customers, who are potentially the wholesalers. If they like the product, I guarantee you, if you are aggressive in pricing, they can give you working capital. And a good example is what is happening between Botswana and South Africa. You can ask banks. There is almost no trade financing between Botswana and South Africa because people trade on open account. One last piece of advice as an entrepreneur. If it was easy, everybody would have done it. You know, sometimes when I go to my corporate clients and I talk to them and I ask them, guys, I just want to tell you something. You are 3 times smarter than us, the bankers. Because if you would be smart, we would be in your shoes. But what I want to tell you, there are 10,000 different banks there also who today are very, very committed to support the SMEs. You just need to tell your story right. And as Alonso said, rightly said it, do your homework, do your business plan. And today, platform like, let's say, there are so many platforms that help SMEs basically to get their tax right.
Dr. Zyane, just really quickly, when we talk about banks assisting entrepreneurs, I think the biggest problem that we face is the issue of collateral. You're just starting out. You want to set up a business. Where do you get the collateral from? Are we, in your own honest opinion, do you think the banks are being very helpful in that regard? Is there a way that I could walk to your bank and probably get a loan, you know, without the issue of, so much collateral?
Do you
It's a bit
know,
of a difficult question.
I always tell to people, you walk before you run. Your first funder, and believe me, even after 22 years of investment banking, I face the same problem like you face. Start with your friends, your family. Start small. And today, what I was telling young people, they just think that we're going to start making $1 million a day.
Doesn't work
Believe
like
me, each individual company today that has gone big in a sustainable manner has started brick by brick. Have you seen how many computers, wrongly designed computers, Steve Jobs has built before he gets the right one? He got it wrong many, many times, but he never gave up. Just don't give up. And the harder you try, the luckier you become.
All right, more questions? Remember our topic of discussion this afternoon, innovative approaches to the sustainable development goals.
Can I throw a challenge out there based on your
Yeah, sure,
question
Sam,
around
go
love
ahead.
money? What stops this cohort here of smart, engaged people who obviously share a common set of values from setting up something in Africa like a crowdfunding platform
Correct.
and doing it for yourselves from the inside out? Because a lot of young entrepreneurs worldwide now are tapping those crowdfunding platforms worldwide
Correct.
for small amounts of money, and it becomes gamified, and the risk is managed by opinion and by, if you don't pay somebody the money back, then you're never going to get another chance, kind of thing. So it solves the collateral problem to some extent.
The gentleman here.
Thank you very much. So it seems to me that Africa's niche lies within the agricultural sector.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a country with about 15% of the world's population that possesses over 60% of the world's arable land. That notwithstanding, we have a situation where Africa, collectively as a continent, has a colossal food import bill, something within the region of about 35 to about 50 billion US dollars, depending on what your source is. For me, this is the best indicator that there is gross inefficiency within the agricultural sector, because
Absolutely.
first and foremost, this is an import bill that should never be. My question to the panelists is, how can we best increase efficiency within the agricultural sector, possibly using innovation in such a manner as to ensure that Africa not only reduces on the food import deficiency, but in fact earns revenue by possibly exporting food?
Thank you.
I think one of the things that has to be done is the reduction of the barriers to inter-regional trade. I mean, you were describing trade to the United States, to outside, but really a key to the wealth of Africa is going to be the opening up of the borders between the African states to actual trade between the nations. And it's a disgrace that we have the kinds of delays and barriers to move goods, let's say, from Namibia to Botswana to South Africa, can require perhaps a week or more of transport. And much of that time involves sitting at borders, waiting for the paperwork to get done. We've tried with different approaches that have been received with greater or lesser success from some of the governments in terms of having single window custom windows so that goods can be moved swiftly through. There's even been some experimentation with just trying to physically expand the number of lanes that are available at borders to promote greater traffic, particularly looking to the agricultural traffic that could be potentialized from Malawi, from Zambia to South Africa and back. You would think that that would be something that governments would look to address. The reality of the drought here in South Africa has raised alarms that South Africa is going to need to import on the order of 5 million tons or more of maize, and yet the actual port capacity in South Africa would barely allow for half of that. And yet there really hasn't been serious attention on the part of either Transnet or other parastatals in terms of vastly improving the capacity to move goods out of port. I was stationed in Angola back about 10 years ago, and I remember to this day seeing the quantity of tankers and large cargo ships parked out in the Bay of Luanda and out in the ocean, and it would take on the order of 50, 60, 70 days just to be able to offload goods at the port of Luanda, either for import or export. So we've got to be able to tackle those kinds of issues on a macro scale, as well as looking to, on a micro scale, better democratization of information, as Mabuba and Simon were talking about before. For example, on the issue of finding finance and being able to access finance. There's been efforts here with the Small Enterprise Development Agency in terms of launching an app called FinFind, which can be found at www.finfindeasy.coza. Caught the commercial there? And that app actually provides a free array of financial literacy and access to credit options to help small producers, small entrepreneurs be able to see what would make sense in terms of finding financing. So I think we got to tackle it at a number of different ways, and there's got to be demand from civil society to be able to push that.
Can I add to that? Because you specifically mentioned harbors, and it triggered a thought in my mind. We did a project with a harbor in Europe, the second biggest harbor in Europe. And we were able, by using information, to double the throughput of that harbor without building a single additional physical facility. But the thing that stands out when you dig into this project is it's all about people getting their egos out of the way and sharing information. I think we still find very often the mindset that people hold information close because they somehow think it gives them power. When you unleash it, when you share it, when you mash it up into agency, public sector, private sector working together, you can make magic happen because you suddenly get insights and you take a lot of this friction that you talked about out of the system. Not easy, but it can be done.
Yes. And also, just one comment, and I think that your point that you make about agriculture, I also do strongly believe that this is one area where Africa has a strategic, let's say, lead in leading the world. And I give you one small example. There is a drought in South Africa, in Southern Africa. Everybody is rushing to get maize from Zambia. Now, if Zambia opens the border, do you know what's going to happen? Zambia will, at the end of the year, Zambia will start importing maize. Now, if you are a government, and sorry to say it too openly, your first priority is to stay in power. Right? Now, a country that was used to export maize, start importing maize. You are in trouble. What do I do as a government? I close the border. Or what do I do as a government? I control the border. Regardless of the wonderful work that USAID is doing, trying to help to make the border fluid, I will listen here and I will close here. Right? But what I think could be an innovative solution is by creating what I will call regional production hubs.
Yeah, growing more maize.
We know that Zambia has water, Zambia has arable land. Let's get together with Southern Africa and empower Zambia, help Zambia to produce more maize. We know that Botswana, let's say, do cattle and has been trusted by the European Union to export cattle. Let's help Botswana to produce cattle. And with, let's say, the cattle feed from Zambia, I feed Botswana to export. Believe me, by just maximizing the strengths of each individual country, everybody benefits. It becomes win-win. And you will see that the border becomes fluid. And now, getting back again to the Mandela Foundation, Mandela Washington Foundation program, who put young African leaders together, nothing prevents you to get together and do a common farm, a regional farm in Zambia, a regional cattle farm in Botswana. Because when you cross borders, believe me, it becomes fluid. Because you guys, believe me, there are two group of individuals that politicians fear in Africa. It's the youth and the army.
I like that.
And you have the power.
Some more questions?
Thank you very much. My name's Temba Mundiamwimo, and I'm from Zambia. And it's a very interesting topic that we have. So the question I'd like to pose to all of you on the panel is how best then we can make technology and apps available to the various sectors and economies that need them, because technology is really a tool that can really be used to not only develop our individual countries, but also our continent as at large. And it would really be very nice if we could also open the borders and the boundaries for young people that are interested in technology to develop and allow them to maybe use it in some already established institutions so that they can better learn what it is that works and does not really work. Thank you very much.
All right, Simon, take that.
So thank you for the question. I think you hit on something that's really important. The first thing I'm going to throw back is kind of a challenge and a question. And everybody I know out there is trying to do what they can to raise the level of STEM skills across Africa. But we all do our individual things. And again, I think it comes back often to egos. You know, this company wants to be seen to be outdoing that company because they think they'll look better. If we could find a way, and maybe you guys can, to pull all of these efforts together so we really are moving in the same direction and maximizing the impact, that would be fantastic. But speaking only from my own company's perspective, as SAP, we think this is really important. So we're trying to engage in different areas. We're engaging with universities. We have something called a University Alliance program where we donate our software, and we have people who help both faculty and students to understand how software really gets applied inside large and small organizations. So we do that. We have launched something called Open SAP, which is a massive online course environment that anybody in this room can go and do various courses on, and I'd urge you to investigate that as well. And then we try and work as much as we can with governments to really particularly to take graduates and not just educate them, but place them in work. So we have something called the Skills for Africa program. Now, it's tiny. I've got to be honest with you. I think in the last 3 years, we have taken 300 graduates from universities across Africa, given them further training through this internship type program, and placed them in work. But it's 300 people in a massive sea of people looking for opportunities. So no one company can do this on their own. It's impossible. But if we all try, and if we can all line up better, I think it'd be fabulous.
And
make a real difference.
I think that, Simon, you're quite right. But what I also believe these days, even the way companies market themselves. Today, the consumers are very demanding in the way the services is conducted and the sales is conducted. People now consumers are very demanding in terms of asking companies to do well by doing good. And it's very important, let's say, that motto, doing well by doing good. Today, yes, I agree with you that innovation could let's say, push your bottom line, your revenue in 1 year. But if it is not sustainable, I see that firing back to you. And again, it's not that I want to do any damage for Credit Suisse, but if you see today the loan that Credit Suisse has given to Mozambique, and the trouble that today the country is from an IMF point of view, from a World Bank point of view, even from a macroeconomic point of view in Mozambique. If you see now how the financial market in the world has reacted back to Credit Suisse, if they would have today, if they would ask the same question, would you do the loan today? They would say no. To tell you the impact
of not doing the right thing in the most sustainable manner is no longer admissible.
Great. Alonso, you want to say something?
I think what I would add to that is that, I mean, there's a lot of different approaches that are required in addition to, of course, tackling STEM education at different levels and opening opportunities for youth. We've also got to look at the long game, because the reality is that for far too many of our countries, and particularly for South Africa, which is really an embarrassment, unfortunately, our educational system is so poor that we get so little throughput of children from grade R, from first grade, on into through the primary school education into even secondary education. It's such an inefficient waste, really, of children and youth. In about 2 weeks, there will be in Silicon Valley the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, supported by President Obama. And in the teeing up of that, we had in Cape Town about 2-3 weeks ago a Road to GES activity with participants from the Cape Town Innovation Hub. And I saw a number of interesting activities that are targeted towards smaller children and adolescent girls in terms of teaching coding skills. There's a group called Code for Cape Town, which is working with relatively young girls and women, teaching coding skills, teaching an appreciation and understanding of the kinds of apps and technology I think that you're describing. There's also an interesting group called Sea Monster, which they've actually been operating as a producer of a lot of educational and entertainment videos for big companies, capital cities, ABC and Disney. But they've also been developing STEM videos, games on the iPad and the like that can really be used at the primary school level in terms of building a level of appreciation and confidence among girls and boys of early ages. So I think we've got to tackle it at every different level in terms of being able to introduce an appreciation for technology and open the doors for wider access.
Okay, I've changed up the sequence a little bit. I think I'll pick up a question from here before I move to the back. Yeah. Want to hear from Zimbabwe.
Good afternoon. My name is Promise Mwindemlea from Zimbabwe. My question is pertains to the value chain. So how do you strengthen innovation given the value chain system that we have and the poor infrastructure that prevails in our countries? I'll give an example that, for instance, in the agricultural sector, we have farmers that produce vegetables, for instance, within a 100-kilometer radius. So we have these farmers producing a lot of vegetables, but they cannot find buyers. And then the other end of this, the town, we have restaurants that do not have vegetables. Now, and in between this 100-kilometer radius, there's completely poor, if I'm to be conservative, or not accessible roads, right? So then how do we really innovate around the improvement of the value chain infrastructure systems, given that unavailable infrastructure? Thank you.
So, can I pick that up? Because
sure.
we've done a bit of work on this in Africa using very simple technology and creating some new roles. And just to give you an example, out in the rural areas north of Pretoria, one of the challenges we found is that women running their spaza shops had to shut their shop in order to go and replenish at the local metro, which meant they weren't selling while their shop was closed, and they had the additional burden of needing to pay a taxi fare to get to wherever it is they go and buy their stuff. So what we did, working with the community and with the university, was we put together a concept whereby the woman on a feature phone can put in an order for what she wants via a simple SMS to a local infopreneur. It was a new role that was created in the community, who then consolidates all of those orders much to your point earlier on, goes to Metro, gets a better deal because he or she is now bringing orders from 10 or 12 spaza shops, does that buying, brings it back on one taxi journey, and then breaks bulk and takes it the last mile to those spaza shops. So it's kind of the reverse of what you're talking about. So what we're doing now is we've taken that notion and we're building out a platform which we call rural sourcing. And what that's all about really is making sure that the very small scale farmer is now part of the value chain, is able to collaborate with, transact with, connect with people who want to buy their products. So, instead of a Woolworth sitting there scratching their head and wondering where there's a small organic farmer, they now have a platform where they can go and find those small farmers and they can do business together. It doesn't solve some of the logistics problems around the fact that there might not be a road in place, but then we have some entrepreneurs out there in Africa who are using drones to address that kind of problem.
And look, I think that's a good challenge, but not an impossible problem to solve. Today, you have a minivan that is four-wheel drive. Having a road that is not accommodable is not a challenge. Innovate, create a minivan that is four-wheel drive. But what I'm trying to tell you is that today, right, when you see all those challenges and all those challenges, you must see opportunity and not see obstacle. And today, if you just say, for example, what Zay was saying about is rural sourcing is one thing to do. But also, going and collecting the different orders of those restaurants and getting it back to the farmers, and the farmers getting them together and coming to the market together could also be a very simple way of solving the problem.
You might even create employment by using youths on bicycles.
Correct.
To do that last mile thing. There's a young man in one of the townships here in South Africa who's delivering bread on a bicycle. I mean, it's kind of going back a step because people might think, I don't want to ride a bicycle, but it's getting a job done and it's creating work for somebody.
Okay, some more questions?
Good afternoon, everyone. Unami from Botswana. My question is, in the age of technology and innovation, I just want to ask, is it not time that Africa rethinks its industrial policy as different countries? Because I think that we were on the right path somewhere between the 60s and the 70s. Then something happened during that time that most, if not all of our countries abandoned the industrial policy and agriculture as a means towards development. So right now there's this buzz that agriculture, but no one is talking about the industrial policy. So my question to you and to anyone in the house is it not time that we rethink, relook, revise, and implement the industrial policy? Because that is the only way that we can have a sustainable agricultural base. Without a sustainable agricultural base, we cannot do anything. So perhaps it's time.
Alonzo, did you want to take that one up? Or Simon, really quickly?
So, I mean, I think the lady is right. My big fear is that we've missed the boat almost, because, if you think about how those tiger economies in the Far East grew, jobs moved from Western Europe and the United States to a labor force that was cheaper, so it was wage arbitrage in China, in Vietnam, and in India. But what's starting to happen now with technology is a lot of those jobs are starting to be automated and done by robots. So they're not going to come to Africa necessarily. They'll probably go back to the point of consumption and be done there by a robot. So we've got to think about that and think a step beyond that. And I think the question this gentleman asked over here just now about how do we start to build a society that has got lots of people out there that can think about how to use information, develop new applications, find new ways to collaborate is really, really important. That doesn't mean we shouldn't look at industrial policy, but I think we've got to actually look what comes next and try and because you used the term earlier on, leapfrog. Maybe we have to leapfrog. And certainly we should be beneficiating more of what we dig out the ground here,
Correct.
whether it's a crop or a mineral.
And this is what I wanted to add, Simon. you come from Botswana, right? Last year, I went to Surat in India. They don't produce one single stone of diamond. There was 20,000 jobs from Surat polishing diamond. And now, can you just imagine you flip the coins and push 20,000 young Botswana people to own small, medium-sized enterprises where they buy stone from the government, cut it, polish it, and start just having shop around the world? Is it not fair trade? I think that Africa today had everything to beat the world. We have the mineral resource and we have the arable land. Without our raw mineral resources, the Western world cannot live. But what we are doing, we are exporting it raw. Let's leverage technology and beneficiate locally. Leverage agriculture to feed our people. And we reverse the gear.
Okay, great. So we have 10 minutes, so I'm hoping that we can pick up about at least 2-3 questions before we wrap up. So we take the question from there.
Thank you very much, fellow leaders. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Goodness, I'm still sleeping.
It's been a long day.
I'm Heinrich Afeni. I'm from Namibia, the desert country. Not anymore. Yes. Thank you to the panelists. I think you guys, your topic is very progressive indeed. And I think my question, I want to applaud the banker, you know, as a tourism entrepreneur from Namibia. And I think I consider myself as an African entrepreneur now. First you said we must not take no for an answer. It's very good. I think you told us never to give up. And I'm looking at your bank, ABC. I'm from Namibia, and then there's Zambia. And I think you understand where we come from. I want to be one of the most successful African entrepreneur ever. I have the drive, I've got the character. But I go to other bankers like, you nobody. But you gave us a positive message. But is your bank not able to come to our country that we can engage you in Zambia, Namibia? Because you understand where we come from. Africa can only be built by us.
Correct.
We are Africa. We're here right now.
Great.
And you understand where we come from. I know there's a lot of banks, but we want to engage you.
Look,
can you? No, I'm not saying that we want.
I'd actually urge you to quickly
okay, very good.
Get your
but
point.
Anyway,
Because,
but this is just a comment of like maybe it's time that your bank is also in all our nations here in the Southern African region. It's time that you also visit us, and I think you understand us very well. That's my question, is just to applaud you, and I think you understand, and we want to engage you.
Real quickly.
Yes, thank you very much.
When is Bank ABC going to Namibia?
Thank you.
Look, just to let you know that our ambition to be in 15 African countries, and I was telling just our fellow panel that yesterday we received $200 million from OPIC. We are closing a banking acquisition in Zambia. I'm sure that those people who are from Zambia know that we are closing Finance Bank. And we are here to be in 15 African countries. But let me just maybe add one point to what you were saying. Sometimes when people join me in the bank and start talking, and I tell them, look, I used to walk 32 kilometers to go to school. It did not prevent me to be today a global international investment banker. If you are an entrepreneur, the journey will be long, the journey will be lonely, but reward is in the end. If you remember Alibaba, right? 15 years ago, right? Everybody thought that it was a joke. Everybody. I remember buying many things, selling many things, including peanut cake from Senegal on Alibaba. I never thought that this guy one day will wake up and do an IPO. Your country is exporting an amazing amount of beef. How many tanneries do you have in Namibia? Very limited. Is it not an opportunity? Yes. Can you leverage technology? Of course, yes. Can you leverage the platform of your Mandela Washington Fellowship program by getting also the cattle skin that you have that is currently not export in Botswana? Of course, yes. You just need to think outside the box. And as I said before, don't take no for an answer.
Great. 2 more questions. We wind up. Please make the questions quick.
Okay, good afternoon, panelists. I think you've all spoken very well. My question is for Dr. Dianjne from Bank ABC. I come from Zambia, so I was very interested to learn about what you're doing with the e-voucher system. So my question is a practical question. If there are a group of young developers, innovators in Zambia that want to work with you on the e-voucher system, coming up with a digital commodity market, what would be the way to proceed since you're here?
I formally say that I welcome it.
Okay.
And test me.
Okay. So we can get your business card?
Yes, an open door.
All right, one final question at the back, the lady there.
My name is Caesar. I'm from Zimbabwe. My question is technology, is sustainable development all about technology? I think I'm rather disappointed about where this conversation was going. As in, it seemed like sustainable development will only be achievable because we are engaging on innovative technology, as in using apps and social media platforms and all those things like that. I think that contributes to most of the mistakes that we're making. Our governments don't ask our people what they really want. And it's also a mistake that we are making as social innovators, or as people who are trying to come up with solutions, always creating these platforms and technologies, whereas we are not really asking our people what they really want. So I'd want to see technology moving more to talking to the people, creating solutions that are not so necessarily technology-based, but take solutions that work. Thank you.
Who takes that?
Can I throw that right back at you, just as a something to think about? Sometimes when you ask people what they want, they don't actually know. None of us knew that we needed an iPhone. None of us knew that we needed a Walkman back in the day. So sometimes as an entrepreneur, you've got to have the courage of your convictions to say, I'm coming up. And it doesn't have to be technology based, I agree with you on that. But sometimes it's not about necessarily asking people what they want, particularly as an entrepreneur, but about thinking and having the insights and bringing them something that amazes them and that they suddenly, buy into.
And something very important. Technology is just a mean and not an end. Even the way you think could be an innovative way of doing things. And if you remember the examples that I gave to you about this concept of agri-services technical center that I saw in Israel. And it's the same concept of this yellow tractor.
Yep.
We just need to just take one step back and say, can I do it cheaper, faster, and better? If you just ask those three questions, and there is a very famous writer, U.S. writer, Alvin Toffler, who said something. The illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, relearn, and unlearn. And the world is changing at the speed of light. If now you're providing a service, selling a business, selling a product, or selling a service, and you want to think the same way or do the same way like 20 years ago, you may be easily out of business. And that's the reality.
Let me just add on to that the fact that I understand your frustration, but I do think that addressing so much of the Sustainable Development Goals really does come down to information, education, communication, and above all, behavior change. And we've got a lot of different tools that are out there. Some of them are technological, some of them are relatively simple in terms of tackling the whole issue of behavior change. And that's behavior change at the level of the household, at the level of the family, the level of the community, at the level of the local government, at the level of the subnational government. And so how can you use an array of different tools, some technological, some involving simply an exercise of political will in terms of forcing the kind of change in behavior that will move us towards being able to address the Sustainable Development Goals more effectively than we're able to do the MDGs.
Okay, great. At this point, we're almost coming to the end of our panel discussion. We'll start with Simon to just hear his concluding remarks.
So I would like to think that sitting somewhere in this cohort is the next Steve Jobs or the next Hasso Plattner, the man who founded the company that I work for. I'd like to say to the young man over there with the blue shirt, he's going to knock on Mabuba's door, that when you're ready to build that platform, come and talk to us. We have a startup program that's specifically focused on tech entrepreneurs, so we'd also love to help you if we can. And I wish you all the very, very best. Go out there and make it happen.
Alonzo, your concluding remarks?
I just want to once again applaud people like Nellie, who's in my line of sight, and Shane and Tracy and others and Joel among this particular group of Mandela Washington Fellows, the 2016 group that I think are going in the next week or two up to the States, and encourage you to use what you've acquired over the course of this year. And I'll say acquired rather than given, because it's something that you've taken, you've shaped, you've modeled, you've been able to adapt for your own. And look for more and more opportunities to mentor and share those learnings. USAID, as part of this overarching YALI effort, has been supporting in Dakar, in Accra, in Nairobi, and now in Midrand here in South Africa, regional leadership centers for hopefully reaching out to many thousands of more who will never be able to have the opportunities that you've had this year. And so being able to take what you've been able to acquire and make it a real engine of innovation, that's the most important thing I'd love to see coming out of this.
Dr. Diane?
Look, I think that I will abandon the same spirit that our colleagues, fellow panelists has said. If there is one message that I'm giving to you, to the young leaders, please be the preacher. Please apply the domino effect. The Mandela Washington Fellowship Program has created this platform for you to be the ambassador of Africa. Go in your country, but think Africa. And when I say think Africa, it's in terms of opportunity, don't think boundary. And I strongly believe that what you guys have learned here, the platforms that have been given to you, is a phenomenal platform, and I believe that an exponential growth can come out of it. Now, getting back to our Zambian colleague, and here Simon already said it, we are here to support, and when I was here to support, we really mean it. Part of my personal strategy in the bank is what I will call the FinTech partnership. Today, with the bright, amazing minds that you guys have, believe me, you will get easily bored working for a bank. But you could come and sell me that service. I need your service. We partner together. We package the service, and we sell it together. You even don't need to. You can bypass the funding, because I could be bringing the funding, because you have convinced me that there is a business opportunity. And I really believe that, the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program is doing a fantastic job by creating this platform, and I think that they deserve an applause there before we end this talk.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank our guests. This afternoon, we're discussing innovative approaches to the Sustainable Development Goals. Our guests this afternoon, I'd like to thank them once again. Simon Carpenter, Chief Technology Advisor, SAP Africa. A big round of applause for him.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Obviously, Mr. Alonzo Wind, Deputy Mission Director, USAID, Southern Africa. And lastly, but certainly not the least, Dr. Mabuba Diane, Group Head Corporate Investment Banking, Bank ABC. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very informative discussion. I enjoyed it from start to finish. My name is Kenny Tonga. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you.
And I look forward to more interesting panel discussions like this. A big round of applause for all of us.